I think we should start, and we'll have another 17 minutes, so they will finish around 10:27, hopefully. Okay, we are all in. All right. Good morning, Korea, and good morning, America. I'm Usang Kim, currently professor of political science at Yonsei University. Formerly, I served as a Korean ambassador to Australia and president of Korea Foundation. I'm very much honored to moderate today's webinar, co-sponsored by the FMC, the Association of Former Members of the United States Congress, ALC, Asian Leadership Conference of Chosun Daily Newspaper, and the J. Kim Foundation. Our main topic of the day is the U.S. China relations under Biden administration and how the U.S. China relations affects our allies in the region. Let's begin today's discussion by briefly introducing three prominent participants. Honorable Jay Kim, would you want to introduce both gentlemen, or should I
More
do
than
that?
yes,
You
more
want
than
to do that?
happy to.
Okay,
We've been
go ahead.
waiting. We've been waiting a long time, but I think it's getting better. Well, I'd like to say good morning and good evening, America. And my name is Jay Kim. Some of you may know me, may not know me. Kind of we're a different generation. I was former U.S. Congressman from California, and my colleagues. I'd like to introduce my colleagues on this second webinar conference. This is very important conference. By the way, Don Bonker, I remember you. Good to see you again, Senator, and Senator Congressman, and also Bob Kasten, Republican from Wisconsin. I'm a Republican myself. Good to see you again. We have a Professor Kim as a moderator. Today's topic is U.S. foreign policy toward China and alliance. This is a very touchy and important issue, even in Korea. Very important issue. I think all of us kind of interesting to hear from you, or your point of view. A very important issue, and I certainly like to hear from you. Again, I thank you for your participation. Please have a good time for the next 1 hour, and God bless you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we start, let me briefly introduce both gentlemen. Honorable Don Bonker served as a Democratic member of the U.S. House of Representatives from the state of Wisconsin. I'm sorry, from state of Washington for 14 years, from 1975 to 1989. He's currently a member of EPCO, Worldwide International Advisory Council, and the executive director at EPCO, global PR and strategic communications consulting company. He's an expert on international trade and investment and foreign policy issues, especially with China. He published the book America's Trade Crisis and writes many articles on China Daily USA and Beijing Magazine. Honorable Bob Kasten Jr. served as a Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Wisconsin from 1975 to 79, and as a senator from 1981 to 1993. Since 1993, he has been president of Kasten and Company, a consulting firm. He has been active player of the American presidential campaigning, helping candidate Giuliani and candidate Donald Trump as a foreign policy advisor. Am I correct?
You're right.
Okay. Honorable J. Changjun Kim was a former Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives from California from 1993 to 1999. He's the current. He's the first Korean American to be elected to the U.S. Congress. He holds a doctorate degree in political science from Hanyang University. Currently, he is the chairman of Kim Chang-jun U.S. Korea Foundation and Kim Chang-jun Academy. Before we begin, let me comment on this. I heard, Jay, you got corona vaccine yesterday. Is that right?
True.
Do you feel
Yeah.
fine?
Oh, I
Fine?
feel fine. I had
I
my
think
left
you
arm
are one of the,
kind of hurt, but it's
you
all
are
right.
one of the lucky people since you already got vaccinated. I
No,
hear
I
about
gotta go back one more
40,
time.
yes, I hear that 40 of all American people are vaccinated once, and about 26% have been vaccinated twice already. Unfortunately, however, only 2.7% of the Korean people have been vaccinated only once up to now. Honorable Bonker and Honorable Kasten, we Koreans are criticizing our government's terrible COVID vaccination policy and poor vaccine diplomacy. Is there any way for your government to help our government so that the Moon Jae-in administration can make up its totally failed vaccine policy and vaccine diplomacy? Any comments?
Well, let me try to make a quick comment. I'm not an expert on vaccine, and I honestly didn't know of the differences, the discrepancy between what's happened in our country and what's happened in yours. But I do know that we're reaching the point where we're going to begin to share our vaccine with the rest of the world. We're reaching the point where we've got a surplus in Washington D.C. today or yesterday. We we said that anybody over 16 years old can just show up now to get their so-called jab, to get their shot. The limits are being taken off because we went with older people first and primary doctors and nurses and others. But now we've opened up the gate. More and more people are getting not only their first but their second shot. And my judgment is that we're going to be in a position to share with the rest of the world uh, within the next several months. So my hope is that close allies like Korea can be toward the front of that line, and we can begin to help you. Now, I don't know if you're going through the same kind of problems that we went through and are still going through to a degree, although, as I said, they're getting better. We had some just bureaucratic problems in terms of just trying to figure out the way the injections would be administered, the kind of sites that were going to be available, and just getting the process going with terms of people waiting in line and registering. I hope that you don't have those problems, or at least can learn from us in the way that we solved ours.
Well, thank you very much for your comment. Especially, America is ready to share vaccine with people in other countries. We hear that you have enough surplus, so I hope that that happens very soon. It'll be very, very helpful
I did
for Korean people. Okay, let's get started with today's main topic. While the United States is facing many serious challenges such as corona pandemic, climate change, nuclear proliferation, cyber warfare, and the trade with China and China's challenges to the existing international and regional order, to name a few, President Biden is inaugurated with his foreign policy vision to restore American leadership in the international system and to renew its own democracy and its alliances. President Biden got off to the fast start and already signed many executive orders and memorandums to deal with these tough challenges. On the issue of foreign policies and national security, the White House recently published interim national security strategy guidance to 2021. Today, we'll discuss whether the Sino-U.S. relations under Biden administration will be different from its predecessors, and what kind of impact will the Biden administration's policies toward China have on these allies and partners' security and economic policies? Here's the first question. It is about the basic assumptions of the United States China policy. The United States policy toward China has long been on the assumptions that its engagement with China will lead China to be prosperous and democratic, and therefore will lead China to be a responsible partner in the existing international liberal economic order. Do you think that that assumption is not realistic anymore, and Biden administration gives up that assumption? Means does the Biden administration consider China as a revisionist power, which will sooner or later challenge the United States' hegemonic position? Who wants to go first? Honorable Kasten, you want to go first?
Sure, and I think that there's no question but that the way you've outlined the issue is correct. And certainly when Nixon went to China many years ago, and throughout probably 10 or 15 years after that, there was widespread agreement throughout the United States, and I would say throughout the world, that the relationships with China, as they grew and as China grew economically, that it would become more of a partner in the world community, and that it would become more of a responsible partner for the kinds of values that we would hope and we understand the world agrees with. I think now Democrats and Republicans in the United States are in agreement that that basic premise has proved to be wrong. I think that there are a number of people around the world, particularly in the Western world, but I believe certainly in Korea, certainly in Japan, certainly in Vietnam, certainly in the Philippines, certainly in Australia, a number of people around the world are also questioning that same basic premise that you outlined. In fact, China has not become, they've become prosperous, yes, but China has not become the kind of positive influence in the world that all of us had hoped. And as a result of that, there's a widespread agreement in the Congress, particularly, that the direction of the Trump administration and now the Biden administration moving toward a more confrontational point of view with China is correct, and that we've got to stand up for the values and the ideas and the ideals that we and the rest of the world believe in, and that the behavior of China, particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, is not acceptable.
Okay. Honorable Bonker, do you have a comment? Honorable Bonker? Okay. I think that he is not, I think he has still problem with the connection. Then next question is about possibility of the Thucydides trap. Okay, since Honorable Kasten talked about Chinese, American premises that China can become a responsible stakeholder is wrong, so that American policy moving toward the confrontational one is a correct one, then does it mean that if China catches up with the United States or even overtakes the United States in its national capabilities in the future, then will that mean that two countries will fall into a Thucydides trap?
Is Congressman
Yes,
Bonker is no longer with us?
Okay.
Okay, well, I'd be
Senator
happy to
Kasten?
respond. I would also be interested in Jay's point of view. He understands obviously the situation in the United States politically, and certainly as a member, he served in Congress and he knows what's going on. But I would question your question, the way you phrased it. You said the United States becomes more confrontational with China. I think it's important that we recognize that it's China that is becoming more confrontational on a number of issues having to do with the United States, but also other countries and other regions. The United States isn't doing anything different in the South China Sea. China is becoming more confrontational day by day by day in the South China Sea. The United States hasn't done anything with regard to changes in Hong Kong, with regard to people and the relationship that reformers and others have. But China has taken a confrontational relationship on the issues of Hong Kong and the protesters. And I think you could go through a list of areas in which China has been confrontational. And the question should be, how should China's neighbors and the United States of America and the whole world react? And how should we deal with this confrontation that we now see coming from the Chinese?
So I agree with you. China is becoming more and more assertive, confrontational than U.S. Position. I'm asking about the American position. Will U.S. also more confrontational toward Chinese assertiveness? That was my question. Many American experts on China suggest that China's intention is very clear and confrontational. President Xi Jinping's China dream indicates that by 2050, China wants to be the regional hegemon in Asia. But for China to claim the position of the regional hegemon, it needs to have enough capabilities to compete with the United States. Do you think that China is likely to overtake the U.S. in its national capabilities by 2050? If that's the case, and China become more and more confrontational and aggressive, do you think that the U.S. will respond with aggressiveness so that the two great powers will fall into a Thucydides trap?
I think that that's a real danger. And I think that what all of us need to be concerned about is that danger and how we can work with the government of China and the Communist Party in China so that they understand the danger of the more assertive and confrontational position that they are taking in certain areas of the world. And I mentioned the South China Sea. We could also talk about, as I did, Hong Kong. We could talk about the human rights issues. But the point is that I think that we're setting ourselves up for more confrontation and more response by the United States and Australia and Canada and Korea and others against what they see as the danger of a more confrontational China. I see that Don Bonker might be again with us, and I'd appreciate his point of view as well.
Okay, thank you. Honorable Bunker, yeah. Please go ahead.
Can you restate the question because I came in as the senator was just finishing his comments.
Okay, the question is two. One, will China will be ready to overtake the U.S. position in national capabilities by 2050? And will China become very aggressive enough so that both countries, the United States and China, fall into so-called Thucydides trap by that time?
Well, you know, for 50, 60 years, our adversary was Russia. The Soviet Union still is, but it was nowhere near the threat beyond nuclear capability that we see in China today. Uh, as the senator mentioned, it's trade, economic, it's technology, um, South China Seas. But I think the biggest concern in America is that for many years we've been the global power. Everybody looked to America for leadership. We had solid alliances. But today, China is about to surpass America as a global leader. They've got their act together. Unlike Russia, it was only nuclear. China has obtained capabilities that not only represent a threat in some respects, but the fact is they're about to surpass America in many areas. And that is very disturbing in America, not only politically, but in the public as well.
Okay, Senator Kasten, do you agree that China is almost ready to surpass the United States?
I'm
Because
not quite as pessimistic.
I
I'm
agree
not
that
quite
I
as
think
pessimistic
the U.S.
as
is
Don
still
is,
very, very strong.
but the one thing that we certainly can all agree with is the
Mm,
trend is going in the direction of China and not in the direction of the United States or the rest of the free world, or the direction of the neighbors like Korea, Vietnam, the Philippines, Japan. I mean, the fact is that the trend is in the wrong direction. And you can argue with, we could argue together, is the date 2040, 2045, 2050, 2075, but the direction is clear. And I think what we need to do, therefore, is to alter our response. And most importantly, and Don suggested this, and he and I both agreed that in the previous administration, there was much too much of the United States going it alone and not working
mm,
carefully with others around the world, whether it was NATO or Southeast Asia or even our close neighbors in Canada or Mexico. But the point that I think what we're seeing now is that under the Biden administration, we can talk about whether this is going to be a strong foreign policy or not. It's still, I think, the jury is still out as to the foreign policy of the Biden administration and how it's going to be analyzed. But one thing is certain is they're trying to make an effort to bring more of our friends and allies together. And as we do this, I think that's the only way that we can confront the China challenge. I mean, it's just certain that we need help, and that's why you saw the leadership of our foreign policy establishment, the Secretary of the State, the National Security Council, the others, starting to make their trips throughout your region, but also working with Western Europe. We've made progress with Canada. We've made progress in a number of different places in which everyone is recognizing the point that you made, and that is that the position of China is no longer a cooperative one. It has become an aggressive, confrontational position that they are taking. And not only the United States, but the world needs to wake up to this and understand that the Chinese have changed the rules. Therefore, we have to respond and change the way we have responded to China. The economic development of China is no longer in the best interest of the rest of the world as long as they continue with this confrontational foreign policy.
mm. Okay. How about this? There are some scholars who argue that as China becomes stronger and stronger, it will claim that the Chinese version of the Monroe Doctrine in Asia, and that if United States and Europe accept China's demand, the world will be rather peaceful. Some of them argue that past history has demonstrated that the Chinese tributary system was the most stable and peaceful system in Asia. It's a totally different argument. Do you have any comment? Do you agree with this kind of argument? There are some scholars. There are.
Well, I would suggest you ask the people of Hong Kong that question. I would suggest you ask the people of Taiwan today that question. I would suggest you ask the people of the Philippines or even
To Korea
Korea
as well.
that question.
Yeah.
And I think there is great concern. I understand your question, but I think there is great concern about the direction that the Chinese are going. And I don't think that uh, a Monroe Doctrine of Southeast Asia is a positive development at all.
Honorable Bonker.
Well, I think that China does is something of a threat to many of these countries, but there are also economic opportunities. And China doesn't hesitate to use its economic power to have greater influence in many of these countries. And that's why President Obama, had worked on this trans-Pacific partnership. And the whole idea was not only there may be economic benefits, but was to put up a guardrail to limit China's influence economically in these countries. And it was a pretty good pact that would have a political as well as an economic benefit. But then President Trump, the first month in office, ripped up the agreement. And now look at who's in the driver's seat in this other trade agreement that the regional economic partnership with quite a few, I think 15 Asian countries. And that's going to bring them closer together. And while these countries are feeling there's some risk, some concerns, the reality is that China has found a way to engage in them and give them greater influence in the region economically.
Well, there are not only a trade war, but a serious high-tech war going on between China and the United States in the areas of 5G, AI, semiconductors, etc. On the other side, as Honorable Bunker said, to fight against the corona pandemic, climate change, terrorism, nuclear proliferation, to name a few, both great powers, the United States and China, have to cooperate with each other. Do you think it is possible to compete and cooperate with each other at the same time? Is that what the Biden administration plans to do? Don Bonker?
Well, the Biden administration is taking a very strong stand against China, as we saw in that first summit meeting with the foreign ministers. We're very anxious to criticize China on human rights and on what's going on in Hong Kong and other areas. And China is saying, hey, that's our business, not yours. And so there's many places of tension, that, of course, being one. But Biden, it's not only President Biden, but Democrats in the Congress have been very tough on China. Senator Schumer, who's the majority leader, and Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, it goes back 20 years. they were opposed to China joining the World Trade Organization. And now Schumer's putting together legislation that doesn't really punish China, but tries to match its competitive advantage in certain areas like technology. So you've got one area where there's bipartisanship in America, and that's on getting tough with China. Again, there are ways you can do it through higher tariffs, and there's no signs that Biden's administration is going to roll back the tariffs, the economic sanctions, and other restrictions on trade. And at the time that Trump had imposed these restrictions, we felt that they were being imposed mostly for political reasons to fulfill his campaign pledge. But Biden is not going to roll them back, and they look like they're going to try to get tougher with China on human rights and other issues.
I think that the point that Don just made is very, very important, and important to our allies and important to Korea, and that is it's very hard to think of an issue or a set of issues in which there is more strong bipartisan support among members of the Congress, the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, than their concern about the increasingly confrontational and adversarial position that China has been taking. When Trump put in some of these sanctions, there was some grumbling, but as I couldn't agree with Don more, those sanctions are going to be in place. It's likely that they're going to be, it's very possible that they could become tougher. But the statement that China is committing genocide against the Uyghurs is a statement as strong as any Secretary of State has ever made about China. And there are other statements that I think that we very easily could be seeing. My judgment is that Nick Burns will be our new ambassador to China. And I think that one of the most interesting, maybe in the last several years, confirmation hearings is going to be the confirmation hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee of the next ambassador, of our next ambassador to China. And he's going to be asked about human rights and the Uyghurs and about genocide. And it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of a statement he makes, if he's going to walk any of the statements back. It's also going to be very interesting how the administration over this next couple of months, and that hearing is going to be an indicator, deals with Taiwan. The Chinese have become more aggressive in Taiwan. The Chinese have become more confrontational in Taiwan. The overflights and incursions of military aircraft and others have become greater. And there's a strong growing feeling, particularly among Republicans, but among both Republicans and Democrats, that the strategic ambiguity position that the United States has been taking over the last several years might not work anymore. Richard Haas, who's the chairman of the Foreign Relations Council on Foreign Relations, wrote a piece that got very wide coverage, and I hope you saw it in Korea as well, saying that it's time to change the relationship with Taiwan, and we ought to do it now so that the Chinese understand that the United States will not tolerate an invasion of Taiwan by the communist Chinese mainland. There are other issues like this that are going to be very tough to deal with, but I think that both Democrats and Republicans are going to be moving toward a more confrontational position.
Yeah, I would just add, there is a difference in how they approach the bilateral relationship. Joe Biden will proceed with traditional norms, building alliances, taking a diplomatic approach. Donald Trump kind of acted on his own. He more or less ignored Congress in imposing the tariffs. He was very impulsive in his actions on economic sanctions and other ways to punish China. And it was pretty much political more than diplomatic. While he had a good personal relationship with President Xi, one of his two campaign pledges, one was immigration, the other was to punish China. And so I think their approach is different. Biden will depend on traditional norms and diplomacy. He has a good relationship with President Xi. So I think that despite all these issues and problems and challenges, diplomacy will prevail.
Most of the American allies, together with the United States, have raised their voices against the human rights violation of China in Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Tibet, and on the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. But unfortunately, Moon Jae-in administration is still reluctant to raise it against China's human rights violation, and even the human rights violations in North Korea. And although the sea lanes of communications that goes through South China Sea is critical to our Korean trade and natural resources supply, our administration is quiet on the freedom of navigation issues in the South China Sea. That's to some of Koreans, that's not all. As you must have heard, the ruling party passed the anti-leaflet law and is preparing to pass a law that could seemingly regulate freedom of TV broadcasting. Many Korean people are worried about our current progressive government's position on these human rights issues and policies that are seemingly violating norms of individual liberty and democracy. These are directly against the values and norms that you mentioned, that the Biden administration cares most. So many of Koreans must worry that all these may weaken our bilateral alliance ties especially between the Moon Jae-in administration and the Biden administration. Do you think that will be in trouble? I mean, that will create a trouble in our bilateral alliance ties?
I think you're touching on a very, very important challenge, not only for Korea, but to a degree for Japan, to a degree for India, to a degree, certainly we've seen it in the last month or two in Germany. There are important countries around the world that have been careful in terms of how confrontational they want to be with China and Chinese aggression. And I won't say they've been able to have it both ways, but they've been less outspoken than some in their countries might have wanted because of trade relationships, because of other kind. We, interestingly, have the same thing going on among U.S. companies, in which we have the National Basketball Association or major U.S. companies that feel that they're dependent upon China and Chinese supplies and Chinese suppliers. They're less outspoken and less direct. I think it's going to be harder, both for private sector, but particularly for the government. And I don't want to get involved in Korean politics, but it's going to be much harder for people to kind of have it both ways. I think it's going to become clear And I think we've seen it in the last 6 months in particular. I think it's going to become clear that people need to speak out against the human rights abuses of the Chinese. It's not by mistake that we're using the word genocide. It's not by mistake that we're seeing other countries that haven't been as aggressive become more and more aggressive on issues having to do with human rights and with China. But the idea that countries can kind of have it a little bit both ways and be in favor of human rights but not too critical of the Chinese, that's going to become more and more difficult as these alliances, if you will, that Don has talked about. I think the alliances with the Southeast Asian countries, it's not, we've seen a number of countries that have become more outspoken over the last 6 months. And I think we're going to see countries become more and more outspoken, particularly if the Chinese accelerate their confrontational behavior.
Don,
Well,
can I call you Don? Yeah.
in Congress, I was chairman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Human Rights. And I also became chairman after Congress of the International Human Rights Foundation. So it's always been a priority. And Jimmy Carter really kicked it off with establishing a Human Rights Bureau. It's a State Department, and then having an annual report on all the countries of the world and human rights conditions. So the embassies would have to report back, and then I would conduct hearings on human rights abuses with various human rights organizations appearing and offering comments on their appraisal. So it's been integral to U.S. foreign policy, but in recent years it's really faded. It's no longer the Human Rights Bureau at the State Department. It's kind of a lot of different things put into one agency. And during the Trump years, there was not a high priority on human rights unless there was a political benefit. But China has really changed the discourse because of what we've seen in Xinjiang and how they might be using forced labor to produce apparel or products that are coming to the U.S. We're now imposing economic sanctions. So it's a big issue in the Biden administration as we deal with China. And at that Alaska summit with foreign ministers, they were lecturing America on our problems domestically that trigger a lot of the protests we're seeing now in America. So they're not taking a defensive position, oh, we are sorry about our human. They're pointing the finger at America, you got your own problems. So that's how China is starting to emerge now as a global power. They have their own playbook and now taking a more superior position on issues like this. But with respect to Biden administration and also the Democrats and Republicans in Congress, it's a big issue.
Yes, as Senator Kasten mentioned, most of the countries in Asia face very similar challenges, like many firms and companies in America is facing. They have to maintain good economic relations with China. But these countries in Asia also fear that China becomes more and more assertive, so that they would like to have security insurance from the United States. When the Sino-U.S. relations are peaceful and cooperative, they will benefit most. But when the two giants' relations become competitive and conflictual, most of the countries in the region will be in trouble. So creating a Cold War type zero-sum situation may not be a good idea. So I agree with both of you, Honorable Bunker and Senator Kasten. let's move on. Recently, President Biden held a meeting at the White House inviting CEOs of high-tech related global companies, including Samsung Semiconductor Company. Samsung is one of the largest providers of the semiconductors to both China and to the United States, and has the biggest facilities to produce semiconductors not only in Korea but in China as well. Now, Samsung, it is reported that Samsung is planning on building another one in the United States. Is there any possibility, do you think, that the Biden administration ever puts pressure on Samsung to take side with the United States instead of China?
I think there's no question about the fact that there's going to be pressure, whether it's formal or informal. I don't think anybody would want to use the word pressure necessarily, but clearly there's an interest, a greater interest now than there's been in recent years in having U.S. companies understand that the issues have now become very, very important, and particularly issues with regard to our supply chain and issues with regard to high tech. And we've got to be more independent. We've got to be less. We've got to be less dependent upon the Chinese, whether it's for minerals or it's for certain kinds of equipment or for certain kinds of chips or other kinds of parts of high tech factories. That without question, there's going to be discussion, and there's a greater understanding on the part of the government, and I think also the companies in the United States of America, that the rules have changed with regard to China.
Well, for the past 15, 20 years, the U.S. has been a leader in technology. You look at Microsoft and Apple, Facebook. We've been a leader. We are now losing our grip. China has been catching up fast. They have this China 2025, which sets a lot of objectives and goals so that it can not only match but surpass other countries in technology. The best example in the bilateral relationship is Huawei. It started as a little modest rural telecom company in China. It is now the world's largest telecom network provider, and also in cell phones. It's up there with Apple and Samsung. I think Samsung's number one now, but Huawei has really become very competitive in cell phones. But the big area is the 5G technology. Huawei, even though it's a private company, not government owned, not government controlled, it's employee owned, but they have devoted 40% of their profits almost from the outset in research. And now they are far advanced in 5G technology, very prominent in Europe and other countries. The U.S. has fallen way behind in this kind of technology, 5G. We just aren't there. And so we see Huawei as a threat, especially the Trump years. They went after Huawei in so many ways. Huawei was a major provider of rural telecom network equipment, which is a big problem in this country because we don't have many competitors. And Trump people want to ban them from being in the U.S. in rural areas, saying that they're a threat. Well, they also, the Trump administration, banned U.S. semiconductor chip makers from providing the material to Huawei. There were 6 major U.S. producers of the chips that went into these Huawei phones, but also into other forms of the 5G technology. Again, the Trump administration wanted to punish, even arrested the founder's daughter, who was the finance chairman, who's been not in prison, but house arrest in Canada now for the past 2 years. Well, how does this work out? Well, China says, well, we can't, or Huawei says we can't rely on U.S. producers of chips. We're going to start producing them ourselves. So the U.S. is losing a huge market. It's just going to make Huawei even stronger. So Biden administration understands this. I'm not sure they know how to deal with it. 5G technology does not come overnight. It's not easy. It's going to be a huge challenge. But the Trump administration had officials all over Europe trying to discourage them from using Huawei equipment. So that's a big issue in the bilateral relationship at the moment.
Well, so that's why America is trying to build not just the military alliance, high-tech alliance among like-minded countries. That's how I should understand, right? Let me bring in another issue related to pressure to take side. Uh, should South Korea join the quadrilateral security dialogue? What would happen if the Moon Jae-in administration decides not to participate in the Quad? Will it weaken our bilateral alliance ties and eventually lead the U.S. to decide to withdraw its force from the Korean Peninsula? How do you think?
Well, I'll let Don talk about this in more detail because it fits into part of what he just said about the Trump administration. But I don't believe that the Biden administration is going to be withdrawing troops from Korea. I don't think that that's a danger, and I don't think there's going to be much discussion or rhetoric to that point. I think it was a mistake when Trump started talking not only about our allies in Southeast Asia, but also about our European allies as freeloaders and not contributing, et cetera, et cetera. All of us understand that we want our allies to contribute more, but all of us understand the importance of the United States troops on the ground in these various countries. I also think that if Korea were to become part of the Quad or other kinds of things, I don't want to comment on Korean politics, but I do believe I believe very strongly that it's going to be in Korea's best interests and the interests of the world for Korea, Japan, India, others to take a stronger position, allying itself against the increased aggressiveness coming from the Chinese.
The Biden administration focuses on coalition building and restoring alliances, and that must be the right direction. But if the U.S. presses its allies and partners to choose a side, then its allies and partners won't feel comfortable. India, Australia, South Korea, on that matter, even as you, Senator Kasten mentioned, even European Union too probably would not be happy, would be very much reluctant to cooperate with the United States strategically based on zero-sum mentality. So I don't want, we do not want that to become a zero-sum type of game. Um, South Korea had an experience when AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, was set up. China pressed South Korea to participate in the AIIB. while the U.S. Pressured not to participate. It was about 4 or 5 years ago when AIB was about to set up. When South Korea was asked by its ally, the United States, to install THAAD missile defense system in the South Korean soil, China pressed South Korea not to agree with the United States. On the issue of the THAAD, it is clear, it must be clear, South Korea should not hesitate to install it because the missile defense system is for our national security. But on the issue of the AIIB membership, wasn't it better for allies of the United States to participate in the China-led economic institution so that China cannot dominate in making new rules that might be too much against the existing liberal economic order?
Don, why don't you go ahead on this?
Honorable Bonker, you have any comment? What I'm trying to say is that if there is a trustworthy alliance relationship, then more allies of the United States participate in China-led economic institutions could be much more helpful for existing international liberal economic order. That's my question. Don't you agree with me?
Well,
So,
I think,
pressure. Yeah. Go ahead.
go ahead. I think that the Asian Development Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the existing institutions were doing an adequate job. And I think that because the Chinese disagreed with the strong United States position in some of those worldwide institutions and regional institutions like the Asian Development Bank, the Chinese decided that they'd rather set up their own shop where they were the dominant player. Whether or not it's necessary or desirable for Korea or other countries to join in that effort is a question for the Koreans. But I think that the idea that the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank were not doing an adequate job is incorrect. I think the Chinese financial institution was set up primarily for political reasons, not for reasons of international economic development.
Okay. Honorable Bonker, you have any comment? If not, let me move on because we are now about 10 minutes before we finish this dialogue. Let me ask probably final question. Last week at the White House, President Biden met with Japanese Prime Minister Suga. At the end of the summit meeting, they had a joint statement, including for the first time in more than 50 years about the security protection of Taiwan. Chinese government is very upset because Beijing thinks that it is a violation of the One China principle. How do you think? Is the Biden administration willing to protect Taiwan in case there is a military clash, even military clash in the Taiwan Straits? I think Senator Kasten spoke about Taiwan issue before, but are you really serious in being involving in this Taiwan Strait issue?
Is Don no longer with us? I'd be happy to. I addressed the Chinese issue with regard to Taiwan earlier, and I'll repeat what I said, and that is I think that the appropriateness or the usefulness of the so-called strategic ambiguity position that we referred to it as in the United States at least, has outlived its usefulness, and that the action over the last couple of years and even the last couple of months with regard to the Chinese activity around Taiwan, both in the sea and in the air, is changing things. I also think that the Chinese attitude toward reform or against reform in Hong Kong, the overall Chinese attitude toward Hong Kong and the steps that they've taken have made more and more people, not just in Taiwan, but people around the country, around the world, looking at, could Taiwan now be in more danger because of the aggressiveness of the Chinese position in Hong Kong? So I think the age of, or the time, or the usefulness of so-called strategic ambiguity is over. I would refer you to, as I did earlier, to Richard Haas's article. Others, liberals as well as conservatives, are saying we need to restate, or we need to state in stronger words, the fact that the United States of America will come to the aid of Taiwan in the case that it was attacked by mainland China. And I think that the Biden administration is likely to move in that direction. Whether they, how fast they move or how hard they move, no one is talking about Taiwan not being part of China, the basic idea of one China, etc. But I think that there is widespread concern about the attitude and the aggressiveness that the Chinese government is taking with Taiwan today. And we feel that it's important for us to clarify our strong position of support of Taiwan.
Okay. Honorable Bonker, you have any
I'll
comments?
pick up where it's moderator feels appropriate.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So how about one China policy? Now, recently, many high-ranking American officials visited Taiwan, right? And China was upset about it. And now you are very much clear about involvement in Taiwan Strait in case there is any type of military crisis. Sounds very much like Americans are now changing its policy position on this one China principle. So can we understand that way, Honorable Bonker?
You're talking about Taiwan?
Taiwan issue, including Taiwan issue.
Yeah, I think that's really the biggest threat to our bilateral relationship, because China feels that's their neighbor. I mean, that's their neighborhood. China belongs to that country, like Hong Kong. And the U.S. has been steadfast in its support of Taiwan, politically and many other ways. So I think if China is assertive on trying to reclaim Taiwan to make it part of the mainland, that could be a very difficult area and could increase tensions between our two countries, because there's tremendous support in America for Taiwan's independence. And the question is going to be whether President Xi or the China Communist Party is going to assert itself to take control of Taiwan.
Senator Kasten, how about your position
Well,
on one China policy, specifically on one China
I
policy?
agree. You know, we agree with the one China policy, but we also have the Taiwan Relations Act, and we have other positions that the United States has taken with regard to Taiwan over a long number of years. And just like so many other examples that we've talked about in the past hour, it's not the United States that has changed its position. It's the Chinese that have become more aggressive. It's the Chinese that have become, that have incurred, that have been uh, aggressive and outspoken. I think that the One China policy, with the Chinese understanding of the Taiwan Relations Act, is the way that we can move forward. And I agree very strongly with what Don Bonker said. I think it probably is the most dangerous flashpoint. And that's why I think it's important that we move away from the strategic ambiguity to a stronger stated position of U.S. support militarily and economically of Taiwan, so the Chinese don't misunderstand the United States position on this issue.
So it is a very good preventive measure, you think, right? And I kind of agree with what you're saying. Uh, Let me, before we finish our talk, let me digress a little bit. Uh, Japanese Suga government decided to release radioactive contaminated water from Fukushima nuclear power plant into the sea. Countries neighboring Japan, including Korea and China, are very much worried that their coastal waters will be contaminated. I wonder this issue has been raised by American side while they had a summit meeting this time, or anyone raising this issue in the media in Washington, D.C. Because it is related to the norms that the Biden administration is emphasizing.
Well, I'm not an expert on this question, and it also seems to be a little bit outside the scope of our overall discussion,
Right.
as you suggested. Personally, I identify myself with those that said before before they should start releasing this water, they should maybe drink some of it themselves first. But I think we're going to have to decide. There's obviously going to have to be some kind of safeguards with regard to the danger to the sea and to the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. Uh, we have only about 5 minutes left, so could you make a very short closing remark for about 1 minute each? Honorable Bunker, you go first, and then Senator Kasten, and then Jay, you are still here, right? So Honorable Jay Kim, so would like to make about 1 minute final closing remark, please. Don Bunker. Are you here? Senator Kasten, would you want to go first, please?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion, and thank you for your leadership. I think that the coming months, particularly the coming months, but also the coming years, are seeing increased concern and increased worry about the position of these two great powers, the United States of America and China, as we become more and more confrontational. I think that what we need to do is to have stronger and better diplomacy, and I think that that's one of the things that the administration has begun. I think we need stronger and better allies, but I think it's also important to. You used the word a little while ago in saying that some countries, with regard to Korea, but you said some countries may not feel comfortable taking a stronger position against China. And the fact is that that's exactly right. And I don't think countries are going to be able to feel comfortable falling back into the position of kind of tolerating or looking the other way, whether it's human rights or increased military activity or the South China Sea or whatever, Hong Kong. So I think that the idea that as we conclude this discussion, I think the neighborhood is going to be probably less comfortable for the immediate future, and that our allies are going to have to take a stronger position against the aggressive nature of China. And my hope is that that stronger position, taken along with the United States and Western Europe, will deter the big problems that could occur in 3 or 5 years with an ever increasing aggressiveness coming from China. I hope we can get some balance here, and I hope that we can get some understanding on their part that the world is moving and they are moving in the wrong direction.
Thank you very much, Senator Kasten. Jay, would you want to make a comment? 1 minute, please. We run short.
Yeah, I was listening to both of you, and excellent presentation. God, I learned myself quite a bit. I kind of agree more and more with Bob Kasten, and I figured out why I'm agreed to. Well, because he's a Republican. I didn't know that. No wonder why I kind of agree with him a little more and more. Yes, I 100% agree with what he said. One thing missing here is North Korea situation. I certainly like to hear, a lot of Koreans want to hear that North Koreans in China situation is, we don't know what's going on here. And kind of North Korea is getting more aggressive. So next time comes around, I think we should really discuss the North Korea issue as well as with China. Other than that, I think a wonderful time I had it. Excellent. I'm supposed to say anything, by the way, but excellent. I wish you had this more often. I really appreciate it very much. Thank you, your participation. And again, God bless America, but God bless Korea.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jay. I think that Honorable Bonker, Honorable Bonker, you want to make final comments? Okay, can hear you very clearly. Let me close this. We had about 70-minute long, excellent and very helpful discussions to promote our understanding of East Asian security and foreign policy issues and to strengthen our alliance ties. I really appreciate your frank and excellent comments and participation. Before closing today's webinar, on behalf of the co-sponsors of this webinar, I would like to thank Pete Waitline, Ken Choi, Jennifer Kim, and other staff members for their excellent assistance. I think, as Senator Kasten has said, situation is going to be tougher and tougher between two great powers, United States and China. But our allies should stick together and respond to more and more confrontation of China. But at the same time, we hope that this situation should not become zero-sum type of game. With that, I would like to close today's discussion. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much. See you again.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Me too. Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.